Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini, better known as Pope Pius II, was the definition of a Renaissance man. Beginning life as a penniless poet and diplomat, famous for his witty and bold writing, he ended up as the leader of the Catholic Church at the height of the 15th century. He was a humanist, a scholar, and a politician who proved that in the Renaissance, a sharp pen could take you all the way to the papacy. Meet the only pope who was a best-selling erotic novelist before he took the cloth. Hey everyone, welcome to Hobby Teaching, a podcast by teachers. My name's Matt, and I'm a teacher. For those new here, I love teaching history, and there are so many fun topics that I'd love to cover in my classroom, but I don't always have enough time to touch on all of them, so I started this podcast. I'm going to be talking about all the fun and interesting and overlooked topics in history that you wouldn't always see in the textbooks or in the classrooms. So, let's begin. Born October 18th, 1405, Aeneas Silvius Piccolomini was born in Corsignano, Italy, to a noble family that was also impoverished. He was the oldest of 18 kids, although no more than 10 are going to live together at any given time. Unfortunately, in these early times during the plague, many of Aeneas's siblings will die before they ever reach adulthood. He only has 2 sisters that will reach that age. Until he was 18, he's actually going to work the fields with his father, making meager money. Even though that they would have been considered a noble family, they didn't have that money, and working the farms was the best way to survive during this time. But Aeneas was interested in the humanities. He was interested in people and politics and government, philosophy, and all the classics. So by the time he turned 18, he left the fields. He wanted to go to university, and that's what he does. He moves to the University of Siena, where he follows the humanities curriculum. He learns and studies civil law. The stint at the University of Siena won't last very long. He will later move on to the University of Florence, where he's going to study aside fellow humanists like Poggio Bracciolini, Leonardo Bruni, Guarino da Verona, and he's going to graduate. And upon graduation, he begins work as a teacher. But this is where his life takes a bit of a turn. In 1431, the Bishop of Fermo, Domenico Capranica, is going to hire Aeneas as his secretary. He's mainly going to work as a diplomat representing the bishop with business, with princes around Europe, with the cardinals of the Catholic Church, and with the Pope himself. In fact, Aeneas is going to be sent to the Council of Basel. At the Council of Basel, they are meeting and talking about the rights and power of the Pope. Ultimately, they believe that the Pope should be stripped of his power and should not be this authoritative figure over the Catholic Church. And Aeneas believes in that. They believe in something called consularism, which is that strict belief that the power of the consul should be more powerful than the Pope himself or any single authoritative figure. So, Aeneas, who is a fantastic writer, is a sharp and witty guy. He works for them. He's very politically savvy, and he works with this council, and he works with them to kind of have a common goal with each other, which is that consularism. So he actually is going to support the anti-pope, Felix V. They are going to vote that the pope is not their pope anymore. They depose of him, and they elect their new pope. And this is going to create a moment in history called the Great Schism. Now, that moment in history will have to wait for another podcast, because right now I want to talk about Aeneas becoming Pope Pius II. So we'll come back to the Great Schism some other time. But he's living in this time that's really fascinating, because we're going to see the rise of the Renaissance, but then we're also seeing this Great Schism where the Catholic Church is split into two between two different popes, Felix and Eugene. And he's in the middle of this kid that was born penniless, born impoverished, works the fields with his father, and he goes to university, works as a teacher for a little bit, and now all of a sudden he's in the middle of this split between the Catholic Church, who at that time was more than just a religious office. It was just as political as a king or a queen or any monarch might be. So he's in the middle of this. He learns how to be politically savvy, what to say, how to say it, what to do for powerful people so that one day they might owe him a favor and he can ask them for things. And that's what he's doing. And he's making a lot of great friends. So in 1435, he is then going to be asked to go on a secret mission. He's going to be asked to go to the court of King James I in Scotland. There, his job is to try to convince King James to attack England. The church has been trying for a while to put an end to something called the 100 Years' War, a war between England and France that has been going on for a very, very long time. 100 years. And the goal is, if they can get Scotland to fight England, and England now has to fight a two-front war, it could put an end to the war. Now, unfortunately, Aeneas' trip to England is not going to be a fun one. His initial plan was to sail across the English Channel and sail into England and then walk the rest of the way to Edinburgh. But the Crown of England at the time realizes what's kind of happening here is a little suspicious and says, nah, you're going to have to find somewhere else to dock your ship. And so they sail all the way around to that western side of what will be Great Britain to land in Scotland, and a storm hits, and the ship is rocking back and forth. Aeneas is shipwrecked, and he swears, he prays, he goes, if I survive this, God, I promise I will walk barefoot to the nearest shrine of the Virgin Mary. And Aeneas survives. He makes it to Scotland, and he ends up walking barefoot through the cold and the snow 10 miles to the nearest statue of the Virgin Mary. And this is going to leave him with arthritis in his feet for the rest of his life. He says he has a permanent limp since that moment. And so he hates his time in England. He walks around and he thinks it's just a miserable place. He even writes very bluntly and kind of funny that in England they are so miserable that the only thing they enjoy is insulting the Scots. So needless to say, he doesn't exactly enjoy his time there. There is also a footnote during this history that as he was there, he actually met a woman and he stayed with her and he had a child with her as well. The child died early on in life, but it does seem that he writes that he didn't like his time, but it appears he at least liked somebody, or he did like at least some moments in that time where he was with a woman and obviously enjoyed her company, enjoyed being around her. Aeneas is going to return to Basel, and he's going to continue to serve in these high-ranking, political roles for this council. He's going to directly report to the anti-pope as a secretary for some little bit, where Felix is actually going to send Aeneas to the court of the Holy Roman Emperor, Frederick III. When Aeneas arrives, Frederick recognizes Aeneas's talent for writing, and he crowns him this poet laureate. He gives him patronage. He says, stay here and I will pay you to continue to write your stories. Aeneas is writing these comedies and he's writing these histories. He's writing commentaries on political actions that are taking place, and Frederick loves him. And so Aeneas stays. He resigns his post as the secretary for Felix and begins to work for Frederick III instead. And to repay Frederick III, he actually writes Frederick's biography. At this time, the church is also trying to pull Aeneas away from this secular political life. They offer him to be a layman. He's made a lot of friends in the church, and they're telling him, hey, if you come and you take the vows, you could be at the church and you can help us even more. But Aeneas isn't interested. One, he doesn't agree with the sexual abstinence. He doesn't agree with that. He sounds like he maybe wants to start a family, sounds like he loves the romantic idea of being around women, and so he's not interested in giving that up at all. Secondly, he's a writer, and his writing style is brutally frank. It's very straightforward, and it's in a way that at the time he probably wouldn't have been able to do that if he were a priest or a bishop. By today's standards, it's very, straightforward writing, but in no way offensive. Back then, it may have been seen kind of as, in a way that was unbecoming to someone who was in the Catholic Church. And so, for those two reasons, he decides he really isn't interested in taking the vows and becoming a man of the cloth. He turns that down. But one of the bigger things that I think we need to point out about Aeneas, and especially in the time that he's living, which is, the Renaissance, Aeneas was born into a noble family that was impoverished. He was born in a time where, as a noble, you would expect he might have, some power, I guess you could say, some authority that, wouldn't have forced him to work his teenage years on the fields with his father. And so during the Renaissance, we get this humanist movement where everything is kind of based off of knowledge and understanding of the world and the people around you. It's based off merit. Just because you're born into something doesn't mean you just automatically get that privilege. Through his own life experience, he sees that, I was born into a noble family. I didn't get that privilege, so why should everybody else get that privilege? What we see is that Aeneas doesn't have any strict rules or morals or any sort of political law that really contains him or that drives him. Instead, he's interested in money. He's interested in furthering himself. He's not interested in joining the church where he is going to be confined to a role. He's interested in this movement of the Renaissance, this humanist movement where we want to complete art. We want to learn about people. We want to progress ourselves. This movement of we don't do things because God told us we have to. We do things because we have free will and we can do it ourselves as man. That's probably more of a bigger reason why Aeneas probably didn't want to take the vows just yet in his life. He was still young, he was still free, and he still had a lot of interest in furthering his own self and furthering his own knowledge of the world around him. At this time, as I've already kind of mentioned, he is a fantastic writer. He is writing a lot of different commentaries and comedies, most of which don't survive anymore. We don't actually have our hands on a lot of them anymore. We just know from his own autobiography that he writes that he did write a lot of poetry and comedies, and we know that Frederick III gave him patronage, so it had to have been true that he was doing this. But at this time, Aeneas is going to write one of his most famous works. It is an erotic novel by the name of A Tale of Two Lovers. We'll talk more about that later on once we kind of wrap up the biography of Aeneas here. But this becomes a worldwide bestseller. He writes this just before the printing press, but when the printing press is made, it's described as this worldwide bestseller, which, by today's standards, it probably wouldn't have been. But it was being printed and it was being circulated. People were reading this and loving it. Now, the other thing I need to say about this is it is described as an erotic novel, but once again, our definition of erotic today is way different than the idea of erotic back then. And so I'm going to talk about this novel later on, and there will be no reason to blush or to cover your ears because Really, it should just be described as a romance novel because that's what it is. It's a tale between two people who are in love with each other but can't ever be together. So by no means is it erotic in any way, but we'll get there later on. But I did want to make, note right now that as we talk about why maybe he didn't want to become, a bishop or a priest of any kind, there's a lot of different reasons. One other one might be because he wrote an erotic novel, something that would have been kind of risque back then. And that probably definitely was in the back of his mind because it was definitely in the forefront of his mind when he is elected pope. So in 1445, Aeneas is then sent to Rome. The counselor and the anti-pope, they kind of realize that they need to patch things up with the Catholic Church. So he goes to Rome, and using his diplomatic skills, Aeneas is actually very successful in patching things over. He talks with the Pope, he meets with the high-ranking officials, and they kind of come to an agreement of how they can reconcile and bring the two sides together. Unfortunately, during all of this, Pope Eugene will pass away, and upon his passing, the anti-pope Felix will also resign his post. And so for the first time since, almost 10 years ago, the church is going to be brought back together. The Great Schism ends. And so once again, it's kind of that funny moment when you look at people in history, like what a time for him to be alive. He was there at the start of this Great Schism, and then he ends the Great Schism. He's there to bring the two sides together. And so an election will be held for the next pope, and there will be just one pope that brings the Catholic Church back together. Around this same time, it looks like Aeneas fell extremely ill. I'm not really sure what his illness was, but he was very ill, and he went through a spiritual crisis of sorts. So when he came back to health in 1446, Aeneas changes his mind. He decides he would like to be ordained in the Catholic Church. At the age of 40, he takes the vows and he becomes a bishop in the Catholic Church. He will continue his diplomatic work with the German princes, and we will see that he continues his diplomatic work all through his life. That's kind of part of his humanist background, that he believes in people and he believes in talking with people rather than fighting people. And Aeneas actually works really, really quickly because of his diplomatic ways. He rises the ranks through the Catholic Church really fast. In 1447, he becomes the Bishop of Trieste. 1450 becomes the Bishop of Siena, and then in 1456 he becomes a cardinal in the Catholic Church. Then on August 6, 1458, Pope Calixtus II dies. On August 16th, the papal conclave comes together. There are many very serious political nominations. There are noblemen and monarchs who are nominating people to be the next pope. And this is highly contentious because the French monarch desperately wants a French pope in place. The belief is if he can bring in a French pope, then the French crown will hold more power. Because remember, the Catholic Church is not just a religious entity. They are also very much political, and any monarch who has the support of the Pope at this time is going to hold a lot of serious power in Europe, in the world. So, obviously, the French monarch desperately wants this to happen. However, Aeneas is also a top choice. Remember, he's very diplomatic. He has a lot of friends around him, but more importantly, he's an Italian, and people want an Italian pope. It's seen kind of as, a historical thing because the church is in Vatican City, which is in Italy, but also choosing an Italian pope would be kind of a neutral option here. Choosing an Italian pope is kind of a neutral way to go about things. The French monarch won't hold extreme power over anybody else, or any other monarch or nobleman that is trying to influence this election won't hold power over everyone else. Aeneas would be an obvious strong and neutral choice. Ballots will only have to be cast twice before Aeneas is elected the Pope. And on September 3rd, 1458, Aeneas is crowned the Pope, and he takes on the name Pius as a tribute to Virgil's Pius Aeneas. It's at this time that some of Aeneas's life is coming up. Now he is crowned Pope, and we will, from this point going forward, I will now start referring to him as Pope Pius II, or Pope Pius, or Pius. Pius's earlier life as Aeneas is starting to come forward. Obviously, we know that there were a couple different women that he may have had children with. He wrote a lot of very frank and bold writings, some comedies, and more importantly, as we talked about earlier, he wrote an erotic novel. He tries to distance himself from this. He will say, quote, reject Aeneas and his former dissolute life and accept Pius. So obviously it's now in the forefront of his mind that he wants to kind of distance himself from that, okay? And so in his papacy, Pope Pius is going to have two main goals. The first one is he wants to restore the papal authority over the councils. If you're scratching your head saying, wait a second, so am I. He got his whole start to his career by choosing the council over the papal authority. And so now as Pope, he kind of realizes that maybe it's important that the Pope is a strong central figure. And maybe he realized that when he ended the Great Schism and he brought the two sides together. Either way, it is very interesting to see that he kind of changes sides here, where he realizes the Pope needs to be a strong central figure and the council should not hold all of the power. The second goal he has is to lead the Crusades. At this time, Constantinople will fall, and Constantinople is a symbol of Christendom. And if Constantinople falls, well, that's the gateway between the Islamic world and the Christian world. He decides that Christian Europe, needs to bring forth their soldiers once again and lead the Crusades and push the Muslims out of Constantinople. Those are his two main goals: consolidate the power of the Pope and then fight the Crusades. But there's a lot more to this, and it is a lot more complicated than what I'm going to talk about in this short podcast. But Pius has not forgotten his diplomatic ways. And I do believe that he believed that his diplomatic ways would solve a lot of these issues. I don't believe his first thought was to fight the Muslims out of Constantinople. He did talk with lots of different people. He did try to mediate. He did try to find common ground, and it just didn't work out. His mediation attempts weren't really working. Still, he calls for a united Christian front against the Ottomans. He's going to reconcile the Emperor of Hungary with the church. He, at one point, the Emperor of Hungary, was a Muslim, and Pope Pius was able to convert him back to Christianity. And so in that sense, we do see his mediation skills do work out pretty well. And then he also tries to mediate with different German princes who are very much, kind of Protestant and pushing back against the Catholic authority. And he actually excommunicates them from the church. He executes one prince even for undermining the papal authority. So we do see him kind of bring that hammer down hard. He tries to mediate. He tries to be diplomatic. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And when it doesn't, he has a swift and immediate reaction to assert himself as the central figure of the Catholic Church. But through and through, we still need to point out that Pope Pius II was a Renaissance man. He was a humanist. Everything around him, the way he thought and what he did in the office of the Pope was humanist, that central kind of part of the Renaissance. He's going to condemn slavery for Christians. I think we'd all like to see him just condemn slavery, period. stop right there, but I guess this is a first step. He condemns slavery against Christians. And so a lot of times we'll see people are going to convert to Christianity and they can no longer be held as slaves. So that's a start right there to ending slavery. He's going to go back to his own childhood home and he's going to hire Bernardo Rossellino, where he is going to build Pienza, the ideal city. This is one of the finest examples of urban planning in the Renaissance. The palaces, the cathedral, the piazza, all of that is going to be built in geometric ways to harmonize with each other and harmonize with the people and nature around them. To this day, Pienza is considered just one of the greatest examples of Renaissance art and architecture in all of Italy. We're also going to see that Pope Pius likes to hold meetings outside. He doesn't hold them in his offices all the time. He enjoys bringing people outside. He enjoys nature. So he kind of brings in a lot of these humanist Renaissance ideals with the Catholic Church. He's doing all of this, and he's still mediating across Europe, trying to bring European kings together, maybe selfishly for his own crusade, but he's working, he's doing this. He wants people to live in harmony. That's his ultimate goal. Unfortunately, he is an older man at this time, and traveling all across Europe and constant mediating and not ever really taking a lot of time for himself, he works himself to exhaustion. And ultimately, he starts to suffer from a fever. He asks to be taken to Ancona in Italy, where he has paid for some mercenaries to help get the crusade started. Ancona is where the Crusades will take off by ship to sail across the Mediterranean, but Pope Pius will not live long enough to see that happen. On August 14th, 1464, while waiting for the Venetian fleet to arrive to carry his mercenaries overseas, he dies. His body will be brought back to the Vatican, and there his body is interred to this day. So let's kind of get into this legacy of Pope Pius II. So we've talked a lot about his humanist ways, and that really is exemplified in his literature. Pius was a freelancer. He was constantly working towards patronage, and when he finally got that break with Frederick III, that's where he really kind of took off. But he was always writing epistles and histories. He was chronicling entertainment ceremonies, histories of countries, and biographies of emperors, talking about controversies in politics. He even wrote a refutation on Islam. His most famous work, though, is actually going to be the Commentaries. This is going to be an autobiography that he actually wrote for himself to be published after his death. This is going to be the first time ever a pope is going to leave a complete account of his life to be published after his death. Pope Pius even said, quote, "My style of writing is unpolished and bald, but it is frank and without trappings. I never write with labor because I do not stretch after things which are too high for me and which I do not know, but I have learned to write." This really just shows that humanist side of him where he was always curious, he was always writing, he was always being straightforward in who he was and bearing his soul on paper. He never tried to do something that he wasn't. He never tried to write about something that he didn't know, but he was curious and he learned and he wrote. Now, the other more famous of his writing is called The Tale of Two Lovers. It's the erotic novel that I alluded to earlier. This has to be one of the most interesting aspects of a sitting pope's life. He wrote The Tale of Two Lovers 2 years before he was ordained in 1444. And it's believed that he based this on a true story of Caspar Schlick, the chancellor for the Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund, and the daughter of one of Aeneas's law professors at the time. Even though it was printed and it was widely circulated before he was pope, and definitely during his papacy, it was 3 years after his death that the printing press really helped take off this his novel. And so it became super popular after his death, especially. Now, in a way, The Tale of Two Lovers is kind of like Romeo and Juliet. It follows two lovers who can't quite be with each other. It's an epistolary, meaning that it's written in the point of view of letters. And like I said, it's called an erotic novel, but it's by today's standards, it absolutely is not. So the story follows Lucretia, a noble lady who is married to a controlling, jealous, and a much older noble. Aurelius is a man who is the Duke of Austria's, the man in waiting for the Duke of Austria in the court of Holy Roman Emperor Sigismund. Aurelius sees Lucretia in a window and he is immediately in love with her. And he's writing her letters and he's talking how badly he wants to see her and how badly he wants to meet her. And eventually it kind of goes back and forth. They exchange letters, they exchange gifts with each other, and they finally meet. And they sneak around and they're in the throes of passion, will be the most friendly way that I will put it. But they almost get caught. Aurelius promises that he will always be there for Lucretia, that he will take her away from her overbearing husband. Unfortunately, though, Aurelius has to leave. The Duke has left town and he must go back home with him. In his final letter, he writes to Lucretia, promising that he will return and to just wait for him. That if she can wait for him, he will come back and they will run away together. Unfortunately, Aurelius never makes it back. Lucretia waits and waits and waits, but he never returns. And the story ends with her dying of a broken heart. So in a way, like it's a romantic novel. And what's most kind of shocking about this is how open and willing Pope Pius was willing to kind of write of woman at that time. It does kind of lead into that stereotypical style of writing where women are soft and delicate and they're desperate for a hero, the damsel in distress. But it's not overtly misogynistic like a lot of contemporary writings or even writings that we see in modern time. Instead, Pius writes, and he firmly believes at the time that women should be free, that they are capable of choosing a life for themselves. He writes that if a husband's too controlling, then a wife will find a way out, that she will ultimately cheat on her husband. And it's just very interesting to kind of see this because that's what he writes before 1444. But when he is crowned Pope Pius II, he is quoted as saying, quote, "Women should be seen as devils." So he does change over time, but it's very interesting to see that this writing, this novel, which is well written, you can find it online for free if you look up A Tale of Two Lovers. It might take a little digging to find it, but you can find it and you can read it. It is a very fascinating story. It is very entertaining. And for him to write about a female character like this who is free and she loves and she's very open, and then to kind of, as a pope, say that women should be seen as devils is very contrasting with his earlier beliefs as a young man. So as we wrap up this episode, this is an important reminder that not everything in history is always serious. Sometimes we get these really interesting and kind of funny footnotes in history that just aren't well known. And every time I start, the research in a podcast, I always believe that the episode is going to go one way, and then it doesn't. And this is one of those examples. I I really wasn't sure what I was going to get when I read the fact that a pope had written an erotic novel. But I definitely thought I'd get something kind of funny and something very interesting to kind of go, wow, look at this. And it's not that. Because what I found is that the life of Pope Pius II is one of those really interesting footnotes in history, and not just because of A Tale of Two Lovers and him later becoming the Pope. Pope Pius II was born a noble, but born into extreme poverty. And that had to have been a cruel joke to Aeneas. He lived his life working really, really hard. He chased after money and pleasure and knowledge. And by all accounts, he was a well trusted and knowledgeable man who was willing to help those in need to kind of navigate politics. And he did it for his own benefit, his own gain. And Pope Pius was a man of the Renaissance. He was hungry for knowledge. He was hungry to learn about people. He was hungry to be seen as a man who got where he was because of his own hard work. His ability to moderate and broker peace as a diplomat was a work of art. His direct style of writing and his innate interest in research and reporting on histories and people, his passion for humans and the people all around him really identify him as a man of the Renaissance. And later in life, it was clear that Pius wanted to distance himself from who he used to be. Perhaps he may have even regretted some of his choices. But I don't think he should regret or be ashamed of anything. The history here shows us a picture of a true, authentic man. He had loved and lost and written his bare true emotion in his works. And people change. Aeneas changed when he became Pope Pius II. But that doesn't mean there can't be two sides that we can't admire. I admire Aeneas for his hard work and his honest approach to life. There is no doubt to the people around him who he was and what he worked for. I also admire Pope Pius for bringing change and human emotion to the highest office of the Christian Church. Was he perfect? No, not by a long shot, but he was a person first and foremost. He bridged the gap of the Pope being secluded and often distant from the everyday citizen to a Pope who was honest, compassionate, intelligent. He brought these qualities into the papacy that weren't always shown by previous popes. Most popes leave a legacy of religious dogma and authoritative stances on the position of the church in religion and politics. Pius instead left behind the forever lasting image of himself in the commentaries, his autobiography. Pope Pius achieved immortality through the ideals of the Renaissance. Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you're subscribed to Hobby Teaching here on YouTube. I also hope you'll come over and find me on Instagram. I would love for you to join my community. We're all teachers in this world, especially when we're willing to listen and grow with each other. So if you'd like to contact me, you can email me at hobbyteaching@gmail.com. See you later.